Have you ever experienced that terrifying instant when your heart sinks because you suddenly realize someone is inside your home who absolutely should not be there? That's exactly the situation I found myself in one quiet evening. I had been sitting in my living room, finishing the last sip of my coffee, enjoying the silence, when I heard something that made every muscle in my body tense: the unmistakable sound of footsteps coming from upstairs. My house was supposed to be empty, and no one else had any reason to be there. A cold knot formed in my stomach, and my immediate thought was that someone had broken in. I reached for the closest thing I could use as protection, a heavy flashlight, and slowly started making my way up the staircase. Each step felt impossibly loud, echoing through the otherwise silent house. By the time I reached the hallway, my pulse was hammering in my ears. That's when I saw him. A skinny teenage boy stood inside my bedroom, casually going through my dresser drawers as if he belonged there. The moment he noticed me, his face went pale, but instead of panicking or trying to run, he smirked. "You can't do anything," he said with an arrogant shrug. "My mom runs the HOA. I can go wherever I want." For a second, I genuinely thought I must have misheard him. This kid had broken into my home, and his excuse was that his mother, the HOA president, had somehow permitted him to do whatever he pleased. Anger surged through me. "Get out of my house now," I ordered firmly. He didn't even move. Instead, he leaned against my dresser like he was hanging out in his own bedroom. That level of arrogance pushed me past my limit. Without another word, I pulled out my phone and dialed 911 right in front of him. "You should leave before the police arrive," I warned. He just laughed under his breath. "They won't do anything," he muttered confidently. "Mom says people like you don't matter." Within minutes, the flashing lights of patrol cars filled my street. Officers entered quickly, and the boy's confidence began to crumble. He tried arguing with them, loudly insisting that his mother's position meant he had every right to be there. But the officers clearly weren't impressed. They placed him in handcuffs right there in my hallway, his protest growing more desperate with every click of the metal. One of the officers reassured me that I had done exactly what I was supposed to do. Still, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling creeping through me. If he felt entitled enough to walk into my home once, what was stopping him or his mother from trying something again? As I stood in the doorway watching the squad car drive away with him in the back seat, one thing became painfully clear: this wasn't over. His mother, the well-known HOA president, was not going to let this situation end quietly. The very next morning, I woke up to furious pounding on my front door. Before I even opened it, I already knew who it was. Sure enough, when I cracked the door, there she stood, Karen herself. Her blonde bob was perfectly styled, sunglasses perched on top of her head, even though the sky was still overcast. Her arms were crossed tightly, one foot tapping impatiently against the porch, as if she had been rehearsing this confrontation for hours. "You had absolutely no right to call the police on my son," she snapped immediately. "Do you even know who I am?" I stared at her, still half asleep, but already irritated. "Yes," I replied. "You're the woman whose son broke into my house." Her nostrils flared with anger. "He was not breaking in," she shot back. "He was conducting an inspection. As HOA president, I have the authority to allow my family to check for violations." I almost laughed. "Violations? Inside my bedroom drawers?" I asked. She ignored the question entirely and shifted strategies, waving a thick stack of papers directly in front of me. "You're going to regret this," she warned. "I can find you, blacklist you, make it impossible for you ever to sell this house. My son does not belong in a jail cell. He belongs in this neighborhood, protected by me. You're nothing but a troublemaker." I took a slow breath because the urge to slam the door in her face was overwhelming. Instead, I kept my voice calm. "Karen, the police didn't arrest him because of me. They arrested him because he broke the law. Your HOA title doesn't change that." For a brief moment, her composure cracked. She clearly wasn't used to anyone pushing back. Most neighbors probably folded the second she started making threats, but I wasn't going to. She let out an irritated huff, shot me one last venomous glare, and marched back down my driveway. Throughout the rest of the day, I noticed her lingering nearby, Her SUV sat parked across the street for long stretches, and every time I looked out the window, she seemed to be on her phone. It was obvious she was planning something. By that evening, the retaliation began. The first letter appeared in my mailbox, hand-delivered, claiming my lawn was not up to HOA standards. Then another notice arrived. Apparently, my garbage cans were positioned incorrectly. Within 48 hours, I had accumulated more than 6 separate violations, each more ridiculous than the last. It was painfully obvious what she was doing. She was using the HOA as a weapon, punishing me simply because I had dared to protect my own home. But here's what Karen didn't realize. While she was busy burying me under fake fines and petty accusations, I was carefully documenting everything. Every letter, every threat, every absurd complaint. I kept it all. Because sooner or later, she was going to cross a line she couldn't take back. And when that happened, I intended to be completely prepared. If Karen believed her flood of violations would intimidate me into backing down, she was more mistaken than she could possibly imagine. Every time I discovered one of her petty violation notices taped to my front door or stuffed into my mailbox, I didn't react with anger. Instead, I became more strategic. I photographed every document, scanned each letter into my computer, and saved audio recordings of every confrontation she tried to start. Piece by piece, she was building a case against herself without even realizing it. About a week later, while I was outside trimming my hedges, I overheard Karen bragging loudly to another neighbor across the street. Her voice carried sharply through the air, grating and impossible to ignore. "The HOA board does whatever I tell them," she declared confidently. "That man won't last 6 months here. He'll either pay or he'll leave." That was the moment something inside me finally snapped. She wasn't just targeting me anymore. She had clearly been using her position to intimidate everyone on the street for years. Suddenly, everything made sense: the way the Jones family always kept their blinds tightly closed, and why the elderly couple on the corner never pushed back when she lectured them about the weeds in their flower bed. Karen's control had been built entirely on fear, but unlike the rest of the neighborhood, I wasn't afraid of her. By that point, I had already contacted the detective assigned to her son's case. When I explained what had been happening, he showed immediate interest. He advised me to continue documenting everything because any harassment connected to the original arrest could strengthen additional charges. Then, almost as if she couldn't help herself, her son struck again. This time, it wasn't my house. It was the Wilsons' garage. The boy had been caught attempting to borrow tools. But unlike before, the Wilsons had security cameras installed. The footage clearly showed him sneaking inside, pocketing items, and hurrying away. The Wilsons, who had clearly grown tired of being pushed around, handed the recording directly to the police. That was the final piece I needed. Now, it wasn't just my word against Karen's, it was a clear pattern of behavior, and law enforcement could see it plainly. One evening, an officer stopped by my house to take another formal statement. He spoke plainly. "We're looking at multiple charges now: breaking and entering, theft, harassment," he said. "Your HOA president may think she controls this street, but the law doesn't answer to her." I won't lie, hearing those words brought a sense of satisfaction I hadn't felt in weeks. Karen's carefully constructed empire of threats was beginning to collapse, and her son's arrogance had been the spark that set everything in motion. Still, part of me couldn't help wondering how far Karen would go once she realized she no longer had the upper hand. People like her rarely stepped down quietly, and I was right. When the police returned, they weren't just coming for her son this time. The day everything finally unraveled started like any other. Her SUV sat parked outside my house, engine idling, as if her mere presence was supposed to intimidate me. This time, though, I didn't bother closing my curtains. I already knew something she didn't. The police were already nearby. By mid-afternoon, 2 squad cars rolled slowly into the neighborhood. Officers stepped out, calm but purposeful, and walked straight toward Karen's house. I stood at my window, heart pounding as they knocked on her door. Moments later, her voice rang out across the street. "This is harassment. You can't do this. I am the HOA." But titles don't mean much when handcuffs are involved. Her son was brought out first, still arguing loudly that the situation was unfair. Shortly after, Karen herself appeared, clutching a thick folder of HOA documents as though they were some kind of shield. "These papers give me authority," she shouted. The officers remained completely unfazed. They read her the charges: harassment, intimidation, obstruction, and accessory to burglary. Neighbors began peeking through windows, then slowly stepping out onto their porches. It felt like watching a long-standing spell finally break. People who had stayed silent for years were suddenly witnessing the truth unfold. I overheard Mrs. Wilson whisper, finally, relief clear in her voice. Karen continued yelling, threatening lawsuits and promising retaliation. But none of it mattered anymore. The image of the untouchable HOA ruler had disappeared. She was now just another resident being led away in handcuffs. Her reign of intimidation exposed as nothing more than an abuse of authority. As the squad cars drove off, the entire street felt different, lighter, calmer. Neighbors approached me one by one, shaking my hand and thanking me for standing up when no one else had. In that moment, I realized this had never been just about protecting my own house. It had been about freeing the entire neighborhood from the control of one family. Later that evening, the detective called with the update I had been waiting for. "Her son's got a new address," he said with a slight chuckle. "A cell, and with the charges piling up, Karen won't be running any HOA meetings for a very long time." I leaned back in my chair, letting the words settle in. After weeks filled with tension, threats, and endless violation notices, peace had finally returned. My home felt like a sanctuary again, and no one, Karen, her son, or any HOA bully was ever going to take that from me. As for the boy's earlier claim, "My mom runs the HOA, I can do whatever I want," it turned out the police had a much clearer answer. No, he couldn't. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more outrageous HOA drama, make sure to hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more wild, real-life stories.